Hello everyone and welcome to my Soap Twist 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Tensions between the Logan and Forrester families had always simmered in the glittering yet cutthroat world of Forrester Creations, but nothing could have prepared anybody for the violent encounter that erupted in the executive offices that fateful afternoon. Hope Logan, once the image of grace and forgiveness, stood in the doorway of Steffy Forrester's office, her eyes filled with rage that had been simmering for months. Her hands trembled slightly as she grasped the edge of the doorframe, her normally calm voice harsh and angry. Steffy, seated behind the large desk that represented her power as co-CEO, looked up from her designs, her expression turning from moderate irritation to pure shock as Hope's words cut through the air like a dagger. "You did this to me, Steffy. You forced me into this nightmare. You betrayed everything we ever pretended to build, and now look where I am, facing prison because of you." Hope's voice cracked at the end, but she didn't back down. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, as the two women who had been competitors since infancy faced off in a war that went far beyond fashion lines or familial loyalty. Steffy reclined back in her chair, her neatly manicured nails tapping regularly on the desk, a habit she developed while trying to keep control. She had always taken pleasure in being the strong Forrester, the one who would go to any length to safeguard her family's legacy. But Hope's accusation hit harder than anticipated. Prison? What exactly was she talking about? The recent coup at Forrester Creations had been chaotic, Carter and Hope's daring attempt to seize control through legal loopholes that Carter himself had exploited. But prison? Steffy hadn't planned anything so extreme. Or did she? In the heat of the power fight, divisions had blurred, alliances had crumbled, and accusations had flowed freely. It all began months ago, when the corporation was on the verge of yet another internal conflict. Hope's line, "Hope for the future," was revived after being on the verge of being cancelled, thanks to her perseverance and the surprising success of fresh designs by her half-brother Deke. But Steffy, the unwavering defender of Forrester purity, had pushed for modifications. She reintroduced Thomas, Hope's problematic ex, to co-lead the line alongside Zend, thereby marginalizing Deke and pushing Hope to confront old wounds. Hope had fought tooth and nail, claiming that Deke was indispensable, that his new ideas were revitalizing the collection. But Steffy cut her off abruptly. Business decisions were not based on personal discomfort or family ties. Deke was out, and Thomas was in. It felt like a personal attack on Hope, a method for Steffy to demonstrate her power and remind everyone that Forresters ran the show. However, that was only the spark. The true fire started when Carter, persuaded by his burgeoning relationship with Hope, staged a dramatic takeover. Using his position as COO and legal expert, he rebuilt the corporate agreements to give himself and Hope complete control, removing Ridge, Steffy, and even Eric from decision-making power. A treachery shattered the very underpinnings of Forrester Creations. Ridge raged, Steffy promised vengeance, and the family tried to respond legally. Justin Barber was brought in. Plans were devised, but in the meantime, Hope and Carter rejoiced in their victory, making passionate decisions in the CEO office that had previously belonged to the Forresters. Steffy did not take it lying down. She rallied the family, whispered suggestions to Ridge and Thomas, and even used Finn in subtle ways to obtain information. Rumors circulated that Steffy had looked into Carter's previous deals, maybe unearthing prior inconsistencies or pressuring authorities to probe the legality of the takeover documents. Was it a fraud? Forgery? The lines were gray in the world of high-stakes business, but Steffy was determined to make them black. She accused Hope of manipulating Carter and using him as a pawn to grab what she didn't own. Hope fired back, accusing Steffy of nepotism, sacking Deke to make room for Thomas, and consistently preferring Forrester blood above skill. As the legal fights progressed, inquiries began. Authorities investigated the rapid change in ownership, examining signatures and timings. Carter, the architect, received the brunt of the blame, but Hope was also implicated, her name on documents, her encouragement in private conversations that could be seen as conspiracy. Whispers of allegations surfaced, corporate fraud, and even embezzlement if monies were mishandled during the shift. Hope felt the walls close in. Arrest warrants loomed, as did bail hearings and the prospect of trial, and yes, prison if convicted. And in Hope's thoughts, it all came back to Steffy. Hope would not have felt besieged if Steffy hadn't tried so hard to undermine her line, bring Thomas back, and force confrontations. She would not have relied so heavily on Carter for protection or a method to fight back. The takeover would not have occurred, at least not in such a frantic and risky manner. Steffy had broken the fragile ceasefire they had built during difficult times, such as when Liam's health scare brought them together momentarily. Steffy had pledged fairness, but instead she waged war, anonymously tipping off lawyers and detectives, fueling the investigation that now threatens Hope's freedom. "You think you can just erase me from this company? From my own legacy?" Hope asked, walking fully into the office and clicking her heels against the gleaming floor. "My mother built this with your father. I grew up here. Hope for the future is mine, my vision, my name. You canceled it once, brought it back only to sabotage it with Thomas, fired my brother, and when I finally take a stand, you run to the authorities? You make sure they come after me?" Steffy rose slowly, her height giving her an imposing presence as she rounded the desk. Her voice was low and controlled, but full of malice. "Sabotage? Hope, you stole our company. You and Carter committed what amounts to theft. If investigators are looking into it, that's on you. I didn't force you to forge documents or manipulate Eric into signing away his life's work. You did that. You betrayed us all. Eric, Ridge, me. The Forresters built this empire, and you Logans always think you can waltz in and take a piece because of Brooke's marriages." Hope was chuckling with rage. "The Forresters? You mean the family that hires based on blood, that pushes out anyone who threatens your control? You betrayed me first, Steffy. We were starting to get along. We supported each other through Liam's illness, through all the chaos with Sheila and Luna. But the moment power shifted even slightly in my favor, you couldn't handle it. You had to destroy me. And now, because of your vendetta, I'm the one staring down prison time." The mention of previous conflicts irked Sheila's escapes, Luna's deadly spree, which landed her in prison. These were actual threats they'd fought together. The cruelty, however, felt personal and intimate. Of course, Steffy denied disclosing any information. She said that any probe was natural, a result of Carter's dubious actions. But Hope saw through it. When the news of the investigation broke, Steffy's eyes lit up with pleasure. Ridge's discreet talks with lawyers, Thomas's arrogant return, all indicated a concerted effort to retrieve what had been lost, no matter the cost. As the argument progressed, voices became louder, drawing attention from the corridor. Brooke raced in, ever the mediator, pleading with both daughters, Step and Biological, to be calm. Ridge followed, his face torn between devotion to his wife and children. Carter waited outside, remorse etched on his features as he overheard the allegations. He knew the takeover was risky, but witnessing Hope collapse like this destroyed something inside him. Hope spilled her heart out in that office, describing every slight. The discontinuation of her line years ago, Steffy's intervention in her marriages with Liam, and the relentless undermining disguised as business decisions. "You forced my hand, Steffy. You left me with no choice but to fight dirty, because you always do. And now, when the law comes knocking, you act innocent? You betrayed the Forrester name yourself by turning this into a criminal matter instead of handling it in-house." Steffy countered fiercely, defending her actions as legacy protection. Eric's vulnerability had been exploited, and Ridge was marginalized after years of leadership. Logan entitlement fueled Hope's ambition, which had gone too far. Prison was not Steffy's fault. It was justice catching up. But both women realized that the truth was murkier. In the world of the bold and the beautiful, betrayals piled on betrayals, and hope, lowercase, was sometimes felt as a cruel joke. Hope left the workplace that day, vowing to fight the charges and prove Steffy's involvement, if any existed. Trials loomed, families split deeper, and relationships shifted like sands. The aftermath had far-reaching consequences. Katie, now running her own competing house donated by Bill, observed from a distance, torn between sisters. Thomas struggled with his role, questioning whether siding with Steffy had pushed Hope too far. Finn encouraged his wife but cautioned her, reminding her of karma from previous mistakes. Liam, ever the waffler, hovered around Hope, offering encouragement while observing Steffy's vulnerability. Legal proceedings dragged on for months. Hope's defense team claimed compulsion and commercial necessity, while prosecutors portrayed her as the mastermind, whispering ambitions into Carter's ear. Witnesses testified, some loyal, others bitter. Steffy entered the stand, her evidence damning but cautious, avoiding outright admissions of orchestration. In quiet moments, Hope reflected on how everything fell apart. A simple design disagreement evolved into corporate conflict and possible jail. Betrayal stung the worst from those closest, and Steffy, once almost a friend, now seemed like the architect of her collapse. Nonetheless, Hope refused to break. She went to Luna in prison for survival guidance, which was paradoxical given Luna's sins, yet she discovered strength in resilience. Carter stood by her, guilt gnawing at him, forcing him to consider confessions that could save her at his own sacrifice. The trial became a must-see drama in Los Angeles, with tabloids gorging on the Forrester scandal. The verdicts hung in the balance, but one thing was certain: the accusation of betrayal would haunt both women forever. As closing arguments approached, Hope encountered Steffy one final time outside the courthouse. "If I go to prison, Steffy, it's because you forced me there. You betrayed any shred of decency we had left." Steffy held her look squarely. "No, Hope. You betrayed yourself." The gavel finally fell, but the true punishment was the broken trust, the never-ending cycle of retribution in a family united by love, hate, and haute couture. Forrester Creations persevered, but the women at its core bore scars that time may never heal. In the end, optimism betrayed no one but itself, fading in the shadows of ambition and vengeance. Hope Logan had always believed that betrayal was preceded by warning signs, such as minor breaches in trust, unsettling silences, or moments when love felt unsafe. What she didn't realize was how quickly her world would crumble, or how deeply the wounds would cut when the betrayal came from someone she once considered family. As the walls closed in around her and the weight of accusation pressed down on her chest, Hope was confronted with a nightmare she had never imagined: imprisonment. In her mind, only one person was to blame: Steffy Forrester. Hope believes the sequence of events was not coincidental. It was not a mistake or an unfortunate coincidence. It was a deliberate set of decisions that landed her in a cell, stripped of her freedom, dignity, and the future she had worked so hard to create. As the days progressed into nights, Hope relived every encounter, fight, and tense moment with Steffy. The conclusion she came at was unpleasant but firm. Steffy had forced her into this situation, and the betrayal seemed terrible. Hope's life before the arrest looked almost surreal now. She had been concentrating on her profession, trying to maintain some feeling of stability for herself and her kid. Despite the difficult connections between Liam, Steffy, and the broader Forrester family, Hope believed she had mastered the emotional minefield. She believed that honesty and moderation would keep her safe. However, she misjudged how far Steffy would go when she felt threatened or justified in her actions. The arrest itself seemed unreal. Hope was defending herself, arguing that she was misunderstood, and then she was dragged away, the clang of metal cuffs reverberating in her ears. Her objections went unheeded. Some of the expressions she received were compassionate, while others were scornful. Above all, she recalled Steffy's expression. It wasn't triumphant, but it was determined. To Hope, that expression spoke everything. Steffy was not sorry. She believed she was correct. Hope's thoughts were jumbled in the frigid confines of her cage. Anger combined with dread, bewilderment, and sadness. How did things go so wrong? How had Steffy positioned herself as the righteous one while Hope suffered the consequences? The feeling of injustice gnawed at her continuously. She felt powerless, locked not only behind bars but also in a story she couldn't influence. Hope's rage was not solely over losing her independence. It was about losing her voice. She felt silenced by a system that had been overly attentive to Steffy's account of events. In Hope's opinion, Steffy had used her power and status as a weapon. Steffy's status as a forester was significant, socially, professionally, and emotionally. Hope, despite her own legacy, felt overlooked and rejected. Their shared past made the betrayal all the more painful. Hope and Steffy had been rivals, allies, and reluctant co-parents, brought together by circumstance and Liam. They had fought harsh battles and struck fragile truces. Hope had assumed that, at the very least, they had reached an agreement. Protect the children, minimize unnecessary destruction, and observe certain boundaries. To Hope, Steffy had crossed all of those lines. Each visit from her lawyer brought both optimism and misery. Although the legal arguments were complex, Hope found the emotional reality to be simple. She'd been pushed into a corner. Decisions she took under pressure were now being used against her, devoid of context and empathy. Behind it all, she noticed Steffy's shadow. Meanwhile, outside the prison walls, the plot continued to unfold. Steffy was solid in her opinion that she had done the right thing. From her perspective, she had not coerced Hope into anything. She had just spoken the truth, defended her family, and let the law take its course. Steffy refused to accept responsibility for Hope's condition, claiming that Hope's actions had brought her there. This mismatch between their worlds intensified Hope's sense of betrayal. Hope could not connect Steffy's reasoning with the sorrow she was feeling. To her, intent was important. Steffy may not have physically shoved her into a cell, but she had planned events with full knowledge of the possible repercussions. That understanding, that readiness to let Hope fall, seemed like a purposeful act of cruelty. Isolation heightened Hope's feelings. Isolated from her loved ones, she clung to her memories and sorrows. She reflected on her mother, Brooke, and the anguish this ordeal would give her. She was constantly concerned about her daughter, fearing the emotional wounds that separation may leave behind. And she wondered of Liam, wondering where his true loyalties were. Would he recognize the injustice, or would he accept Steffy's story as easily as everyone else did? Hope's most difficult moments came when she allowed herself to be vulnerable. Anger was easier, it gave her strength and something to grab onto. But underneath the fury came a deep melancholy. She regretted the life she had lost and the trust that had been broken. She lamented the version of Steffy she wished still lived, the one capable of empathy and discipline. Hope's time in prison also led her to confront hard realities about herself. She questioned her own decisions, wondering whether she had been too innocent, too forgiving, and too trusting that people would act decently. She questioned whether her longing for peace had made her subject to deception. These reflections were difficult, but unavoidable. As the days passed, Hope vowed not to let bitterness consume her. While she held Steffy accountable, she recognized that survival required clarity. She began to concentrate on restoring her agency, even from behind bars. She collaborated carefully with her legal team, determined to explain her side of the story completely, no matter how long it took. She refused to accept Steffy's story as the only one that mattered. The prospect of confronting Steffy someday became both a source of fear and motivation. Hope imagined looking her in the eye and demanding an answer. Did Steffy really believe she deserved it? Did she feel any remorse? Or had their rivalry honed her heart beyond recognition? These questions tormented Hope, but they also strengthened her resolve. Hope also considered the broader consequences of what had happened. She regarded her predicament as part of a bigger pattern, one in which power and privilege could impact results and truth was subordinate to influence. This knowledge heightened her sense of injustice, while also strengthening her will to fight back. Despite everything, simple acts of humanity brought Hope comfort. A friendly comment from another inmate, a letter from her mother, a recollection of joy shared years ago. These shards reminded her that she was more than the accusations leveled against her. They reminded her of her ability to love, persevere, and grow. As the likelihood of release or exoneration remained uncertain, Hope braced herself for whatever came next. She realized that even if she walked free, the consequences of her betrayal would endure. Trust, once shattered, could not be readily restored. Her already delicate relationship with Steffy appeared to be beyond repair. Perhaps Hope would have to accept this in the end. However, Hope believed in metamorphosis. She had based her life on concepts like hope, forgiveness, and second chances. Even now, in the worst period of her life, she fought to reconcile those values with the reality of Steffy's actions. Her ideals and rage were in continual conflict, with no resolution. In the end, Hope's story was more than simply betrayal and blame. It was all about endurance. It told the story of a lady who was put into unjust circumstances and fought to restore her truth and future. It was unclear if the world would regard Steffy as the villain Hope imagined her to be. What was certain was that Hope would never forget the feeling of being abandoned by someone who claimed to be acting for the greater good. As she waited for the next chapter to begin, Hope retained one unwavering belief. Her narrative was not over. Prison may have constrained her body, but it did not break her spirit. And someday, she would ensure that her voice was heard, clearly, fully, and fearlessly.